But can it run Crysis? Well, it sure can now, 10 years after release, but back in 2007, most people would have responded with a depressed sigh following no. That's because Crysis was designed to be the best looking game ever released, banking on raw graphical power over art. And thanks to CryEngine 2, the successor to the original that we saw in Far Cry, it was the best looking game ever released. But making games look good isn't very hard. A good dev team with a fat budget can make any game look astounding, but they don't. Why? Because they intend to sell it to people who probably don't have graphics cards that make Skynet look like a TI-80. Impressive graphics requires impressive hardware, and impressive hardware costs money, and a damn lot of it. Which is why console manufacturers like Sony and Microsoft don't put impressive hardware in their consoles. They need to keep prices low to reach the biggest market, and of course to stay competitive. This is why graphics in video games only make major leaps once per console generation. Most of you would have noticed it from the 360 and PS3 to the One and PS4, but there's something special about PCs. They don't have generations, they have parts that can be replaced at will. They can be upgraded one component at a time. They can keep up with technology far closer than consoles can, yet they don't. Well, they don't anymore. PC games now look marginally better than console games, with the only major upside being a higher frame rate. Why this is a discussion for another time, but in 2007, Crytek saw the opportunity to make something far ahead of its time, to buck the trend of following the consoles and to push hardware to the limit. But why? Crysis was the best looking game ever created, but who's it for? PC gamers supposedly, but even at Crysis' E3 showing on a test bench with Nvidia's monster GT 8800, it still couldn't run at max settings reliably. No consumer grade hardware in existence could. Crysis had 3,000 pages of over 1 million lines of code, 1 GB of texture data, and 85,000 shaders. This made it so hard to play that even being able to run Crysis was a badge of honor for high-end graphics cards. And so, the phrase, "but can it run Crysis," was born. A phrase that Crysis owes its popularity to, and its failures. But Can It Run Crysis isn't solely in reference to the game's graphics. Its sheer size was also a big factor. No, you can't free roam on this island. Instead, each level is a large map of its own. The design of these is simple, but that's hard to notice when shrouded in the game's technical beauty. Enemy bases are littered around a map. There's usually one big one, and a few outposts. Your TAC map will give you a green marker for primary objectives, and possibly a yellow for secondary. You could get to them however you pleased. Perhaps you were willing to risk taking a vehicle on the roads, which might have enemy patrols or checkpoints. Perhaps you wanted to take it slow and careful through the bush. Perhaps you decide to peel off from the main objective to go deal with the secondary. They serve to make use of open environments by giving legitimate incentive to go off the beaten track and fight through some more enemies. You could get a weapon to deal with a tank that's been harassing you, or some fire support from friendlies. Regardless, it's a debate between time and difficulty, which you can decide on depending on your own skill level. It's one of the best ways to do dynamic difficulty in gaming. Not only does it make the world feel like a system that actually operates, but it also involves actual gameplay and decision making in difficulty. It's no surprise that something like this shows its head even in non-FPS games today. Shadow of War with its war chiefs and Assassin's Creed with its assassination missions. But the freedom of player choice even extends into tackling enemy bases themselves. And I'm not just talking about the massive amount of physics objects that extend the tactical element of the game like nothing before it. You could use the tree cover to get close to enemy bases and sneak in. Perhaps the water, perhaps the rocks. Observing enemies, where they're focused, and what you might be able to do, whether it be stealth or assault, is as important as gun skill. Guns are also a factor you need to consider. If you've got a sniper, perhaps finding somewhere far off and picking off enemies might be the best choice. Or a shotgun might encourage getting as close as possible. The 2-gun limit and huge availability of highly versatile assault rifles means you're rarely limited to those extremes. They're simply factors you need to consider. Guns also have a limited but on-the-fly customization menu. This system was praised for how simple it was, but in reality the only thing you'll ever want to alter is the silencer that trades damage for noise. It's always worth having the grenade launcher and never worth having the tactical sleep dart. There's no point in going non-lethal in Crysis, it's hideously inefficient. The gun customizer was an excellent idea in concept, but weak in execution. Bases themselves are commonly surrounded with gates that force the player into obvious entrances. A gated base will usually only have 1 or 2 holes for sneaking, and the head-on approach can only happen from the heavily guarded entrances. While this restricts player choice, it's actually a highly effective way of increasing difficulty from the open-sided bases of the early game. It can be a lot harder to see into a gated base and learn the locations of enemies, so sneaking will often be blind, and if you're discovered you'll have a much harder time knowing where to go. A straight-up firefight can be suicide, as gates funnel enemies into tighter areas around the entrances and the player has fewer lines of fire to work with. But this doesn't have to spell the player's doom. Not only can this be an incredibly useful distraction, but if you can lure enemies into your own domain, they're easy pickings. Playing the Predator is something that's become iconic for the Crysis franchise. Some of that's down to the nano suit, but in the first games your health pool was so small that it wasn't just a matter of playstyle. Even on normal, the fire of a single enemy can take you out in a few seconds. Available cover was as much a health bar as that green line down below. The island setting serves the need for cover effectively with trees and rocks, but the bases are all packed just densely enough that you can survive as long as you're dishing out as much damage as you're taking. Enemies outnumber the player 20 to 1, and they will not shy from moving straight to your position and turning you into a human pencil if you stop dipping between cover. You might assume that it would be hard to stay detected for long given how big Crysis was compared to games we're used to now, but enemies remain engaged and deadly at huge ranges. Detection is not something at all rare. You could compare the enemy's FOV to anything you'd expect from a real soldier. The player has to stay low to keep out of sight. AI works off a last known position system that made them cluster towards the area that the player was last detected. This AI system is commonplace, but many games make it seem far more sophisticated with comms chatter, responding to dead bodies, and flanking maneuvers. Enemy soldiers in Crysis are highly limited in all of these respects. They don't react at all to dead bodies. While this creates less stealth possibilities, not having the player consider things like that probably serves the action focus of the game far more than if otherwise. The game does an excellent job at hiding the AI's failings by making them so dangerous. Their numbers and lethality force you to reposition at the earliest opportunity rather than hold your ground in one spot for an entire battle, often making their ability to flank redundant. And if anything, Crysis' AI being as functional as it is should receive high praise. With open areas and undefined paths, enemy AI had a much harder time at seeming real than a game set in largely tight areas. With as much respect as I have for Fear, it did take the easy way out, and it's fairly well known that a degree of Fear AI's flair came from how the soldiers communicated amongst themselves. The computer knows exactly what you're doing, so when you're in a detected state, it signals certain voice lines to be played depending on what you're doing or what you're hiding behind.
Echo Zero, check in. Echo Zero, what's your status? No response from Echo Zero. Should we investigate? Negative. Hold position. Let's secure this area. Echo 6 in position. Roger, Echo 6. Intruder has been confirmed. Stay alert. Here! Check the upper floor. Yes, sir.
It gave a layer of illusion to the AI on top of the generally top-notch pathfinding, something I think Crysis could have greatly benefited from. It's in the tight sections like Fear that the player is able to use the lean function to hose down enemies without exposing yourself. It can be desperate, but the player is fully capable of using their subtle movement abilities to survive. Open areas aren't always a kill box either. Guns may be highly inaccurate when standing and moving, but you are fully capable of operating at long range with the prone function. Combine that with leaning and you can place pinpoint shots on snipers or gunners who would have previously torn you apart if you exposed yourself. Even in this position, you aren't a laser. Assault rifles can miss their mark even if your reticle is on its target's head. This counteracts any urges the player might have to camp at long range even if they don't have a sniper. You need to get closer. But how? Well, you're no ordinary soldier of war, you're wearing the nanosuit. Other games had done open areas and bases filled with guards before, but none had thought about the abilities that a near-future supersuit may grant the player. You can cloak, run at superhuman speed, hit, jump and throw with superhuman strength, and increase your armor's damage resistance in 4 suit modes, each of which consume energy from a limited but quickly recharging energy pool beneath your health bar. It's with these abilities that Crysis becomes Crysis. In maximum armor, you can recharge your energy quicker and take slightly more damage, but move far slower. It's a highly defensive ability, vital for staying alive in firefights because being hit with this mode drains energy, not health, which recharges at a much slower rate. With Cloak engaged, you're invisible to a limited degree. Staying still drains energy at an easily manageable rate, but movement will increase the drain rate proportionally. You only need to use it when you can't be sure you won't be seen. It can even be used to walk into a middle of a kill zone and land a closer shot on a gunner. The skill of Cloak is judging how far you can make it without your energy running out, and that can be very difficult to get perfect. Maximum speed makes you faster without any energy drain, at the cost of being opened up to permanent health damage. Sprinting with speed makes you go from Usain Bolt to the Flash. You can use either state for traversal or escaping a situation, but the sprint allows you to smash into enemies, knocking them down. It's actually more prudent to use speed for escaping a fight than armor because you'll be far harder to hit, especially at long range. And then there's everyone's favorite, maximum strength. You can jump huge heights, allowing you to access roofs or even vault-gated bases when the environment allows it. You can knock out enemies in a single punch and throw objects at incredible speed, such as explosive barrels or chickens. The player's situation and circumstance can change so quickly that jerking from one mode to another becomes as vital as breathing, and a tested player will find doing so as natural as breathing. This limited energy pool and the pros and cons between modes creates constant dynamic decision making, which puts Crysis' skill cap somewhere in the stratosphere of Mars. Based on the player's potential for quick and skillful decision making, you might assume that Crysis is the hardest, most in-depth tactical shooter ever made. Well, not really. While creating this huge combat sandbox was Crysis' goal, navigating it was never meant to grow into something complex. Crytek wanted the player to observe an environment, formulate a plan based on all the features of the sandbox, and pull it off. Crysis is far from realistic. It might have the in-depth decision-making and tactics of a truly tactical shooter like Metal Gear Solid 5 or Ghost Recon, but it's meant to be an action game at its core. Bases are relatively small, enemy armaments are questionably lacking, and the nanosuit never grows past what's presented to you at the start. Only a select few structures were destructible, so you would never look to simply blowing up an enemy base rather than engaging with it as intended. Though of course, every game in the genre does this. The very existence of such obvious video gamey inclusions like explosive barrels and the lack of possibly prohibitive weather effects such as rain or wind show you that while Crysis was tactical, it asked you to make quick, on-your-feet decisions rather than grand militaristic strategies, so you would always feel capable, and most importantly so that the gameplay would never slow down. Crysis still is the single best action FPS I've ever played, because there's little that feels tenser than being hunted through a forest by an enemy helicopter, crouching and praying that it lost you, or being pinned down in a destructible shack as parts of the walls fly off and you hide behind a piece of furniture. The roof comes down on your head and you use maximum strength to smash it off you. In the earlier levels, you could even use strength to smash through the roofs of bases from above and use the debris as your weapon. But Crysis was never remembered for any of this. It was remembered for being big and for being pretty. Part of that is down to the obsession with this meme, but the rest is something we don't like to talk about: Crysis' second half. Previous levels had slowly ramped up the scale of bases and combat with larger maps, more powerful bases, and new enemies, the made-in-China nanosuit specifically. And after you take out General Kyong once and for all, it just stops. You go through a weird, nauseating zero-grav abomination of a mission inside a Seth mothership, which has weird door-opening mechanisms that aren't taught to the player, so you just sort of mope about shooting these Seth fish things, hoping that you'll be allowed to leave. Your abilities are mostly useless apart from speed, simply because this place is so damn big and you can't use any of your movement stuff effectively in zero grav. Then you're ejected out and have to shoot some more of these Ceph things. They shoot blue lasers and move all weird, but functionally they aren't much different from Kyung's men. The real problem is the have to in that sentence. There's a little cover, not much point in using stealth or speed since the map is so restrictive, and nothing to do with strength other than punch them. So you just shoot your way through everything. This isn't Crysis. This isn't tactical. This isn't much fun, but at least it looks good. You meet up with Prophet later on and have to baby him through the level because he forgot his winter coat at home. Babying vulnerable NPCs while you just want to get stuck in wasn't fun the first time gaming did it, and it sure as shit isn't fun the 18 millionth time either. Big Ceph spooky boys get introduced here, which are kind of awful. Stealth is still pointless, so you just have to shoot them down while they circle about hopelessly. I have to say, they look pretty cool, and watching them smash down is awesome, but if you run out of ammo, then you're screwed and have to reset. Fun. Shooting these guys is basically the entire game from now until the end. You've got some really cool battles and incredible set pieces to keep you going, but at no point will you ever get to play Crysis again. There's a turret section, a really fun VTOL dogfight section, which gets way too much hate and impressively isn't on rails at all. Then finally a showdown at the USS Patriotism or whatever. The final bosses are the cherry on top of the shit pie. One has no clear instructions on how to beat it. You just shoot a bunch and wait for it to die, all while it lags your PC into an early grave, and then the other one tries to act like it's an epic battle, but since the freeze beam is basically an instant death and all the other enemies will be shooting you at the same time, it actually proves far more effective to just hide in this crashed VTOL and peek out occasionally. This only works because the huge AoE ball of death it throws at you phases through the VTOL and can't affect you. It's embarrassing. I beat it once after it just froze me and then the game saved. A squid Ceph came over and one hit me. I load back in, the same happens. I was in a death loop because of this awful freeze beam that makes you watch in frustration as you try to escape and hope nothing scratches you. Surely just having a death beam would have been better? And that's that. Crysis over. After Kyung dies, the very thing that makes the game is extracted and discarded for very pretty but not very fun action set pieces to take over. Why? Did the story force the game down this route? Did it become too time-consuming and costly to develop these larger, unrestrictive levels? Undoubtedly a mix of both. But no Crysis has ever filled the gaping hole of missed potential since. How they would fit more levels of the same nature as the early game with the Ceph as the primary antagonist confuses me, but I've got some ideas as to how I would have developed the late game. How about a level with a Ceph stalker mechanic, so if you make too much noise through gunfire or movement, the Ceph come to hunt you down. You could use this to your advantage by taking a shot at a barrel in an enemy base and have the Ceph fight your battles for you. How about a level with multiple primary objectives in separate bases, so you could pick which one to go for first, depending on your current loadout and what benefits taking out one base over another might bring. One base controls anti-air, another anti-armour, another anti-infantry, some dynamic decision making in the player's approach of bases, which could also be achieved with controllable NPCs. Perhaps you could call in small-scale support from the military, such as a platoon of soldiers or a bunch of explosive barrels or a motorcycle for a quick escape. These would aid the player in tackling much larger bases with distractions or some minor assault support. Encouraging players to escape a base when they complete their objective with some clever use of enemy spawns would add yet another layer of planning while in keeping with the game's action core. Some of these extra abilities could also be facilitated with secondary objectives. Go take out an AA battery at a nearby outpost for the ability to call in an airstrike. Crysis has repeatedly proven that it has the best nukes in video games. You only need to check out YouTube videos for that. So perhaps you get to nuke a base based on what's giving you the most trouble at a time. Hey, but don't nuclear weapons only empower the Ceph? Yeah, why can't that be another factor the player has to consider? You can nuke a base, but the site will be crawling with superpowered Ceph, and Ceph attacks become far harder to fend off. Since 2007, AI have been able to adapt to your tactics, over large periods of time with Metal Gear Solid 5 system, or in the middle of a battle with Shadow of War's adaptations. I can only wish such a system had been in Crysis, because having AI pressure you into coming out of your comfort zone could only add to the dynamic decision making and tactics in battle. Things like goggles to detect you in cloak if they notice a lot of friendly deaths near the player's cloak use, or armour-piercing rounds and rocket launchers if you never come out of maximum armour or stick around in vehicles. Wishful thinking. Even if these mechanics are just the stuff of dreams, simply continuing the trend of raising the scale of bases and levels could have made for one of, if not the best shooter ever made. But I suppose we have to look back to what I said at the start of the video, but can it run Crysis? Well, with the suggestions I made, I doubt even NASA could run Crysis. Of course, the majority of people would rather a better game than flashier graphics, and I doubt anyone would complain if a certain level needed a graphical downgrade to remain playable. But perhaps Crytek weren't willing to take that risk. Perhaps pride, or maybe fear, irrelevant. There's no point in dancing in the dreams of ambitious developers. The game we got in 2007 had its later half castrated, leaving us with gameplay that showed us a glimpse of what was assumed to be the future, but never quite brought us there. No one will ever know how big a role development restrictions played in Crysis' neutering, but we can take a deeper look into the story and whether or not it forced Crytek down this route. Crysis is a near-future game. It seems every amazing sci-fi that predicts a near future thinks we'll have lasers and super soldiers far quicker than we ever could. Terminator, and now this. Probably a remnant of the futuristic attitudes people had in the late 20th century. Crysis was made in 2007 and set in 2020. Technology is basically the exact same other than the nanosuits, which are later revealed to be of alien origin anyway, so Crysis gets a free pass. As you could imagine, these suits cost quite a bit, which is why there's only a few teams of 5 nanosoldiers in the entire US Army. You play as Nomad, a member of Raptor Team, along with Psycho, a guy who really wouldn't have been able to wear one of these, Jester, the American version of Psycho, Prophet, your leader, and Aztec. No one knows anything about Aztec. You're being sent into the Lingshan Islands to recover a team of archaeologists who've been kidnapped by the Korean People's Army. Yes, America versus North Korea, very original. Well, at least it isn't Russia. You parachute in and get smacked up by a thing. You land, try to regroup and hear Aztec fighting for his life. When you ingest to get to him, he's dead. It's pretty gruesome. This is where Crysis presents its hook. There's something else on the island and it's on the hunt. It's a really powerful mystery, one that Crysis surely couldn't screw up with the TV show Lost doing its island mystery almost perfectly at the same time. Well, you soon forget about that and enter the majority of Crysis' length, going to enemy bases and doing stuff because Prophet told you to. Random problems and plot points just appear so Nomad has an excuse to go fight through an enemy base over and over and over. It's some pretty awful pacing and clear proof that Crytek still weren't used to writing for video games. Eventually you make it to a frozen ship in the middle of a tropical island. Intriguing, right? Pretty much immediately the alien is revealed and it takes Jester. A quick mission after and it takes Prophet too. Right. So much for the alien mystery. It throws its best hook right out the door only a few hours in by showing us the alien. What happened to playing off the fear of the unknown? We don't know why the alien is hunting Raptor Team, but we do know everything it's taken is dead, so it doesn't really matter. Major Strickland contacts you and tells you to get off the island, but at this point Nomad has enough intel on the archaeologists and he decides to stay. It turns out one of them is working for the general of the KPA in return for his daughter's life, and he's studying alien relics on the island to make super weapons for the North Korean army. Oh, for goodness sake. The alien relic wakes up and freezes everything, including the archaeologist, and the island starts wobbling about. More filler Nomad go kill some stuff because it's important Nomad, over and out Nomad missions later, and you begin the final assault on General Kyong. His base is underneath this giant mountain which is slowly peeling off to reveal an alien superstructure. If the aliens had any mystique up to this point, it's gone now. You can see more of the aliens pouring out of the summit. They actually attack the KPA when you go after Kyong yourself. You ask him to stop whatever it is he's doing, but he's a power-crazed villain, so to everyone's surprise, he goes too far and the aliens do a thing. This is where the first half ends and the second half we already know about begins. If anything, the game's transition from grounded alien mystery to over-the-top action blockbuster was not a surprise. The game shows you that the moment it throws out the biggest element of mystery it had and continues to go bigger and bigger, which might put you in awe but will certainly relieve you of any fear or curiosity you might have had that the plot could play off. If you want to know how important mystery can be for a story, look no further than Stranger Things. Even if we didn't get many answers, it's the thrill of wanting to find them that we'll always remember. For a story, the questions are more powerful than the answers, and Crysis has neither. The story doesn't develop any of the characters and kills most of them off not to shock you, but because it couldn't be asked to deal with them.
What about you, Major? I'm a Marine, son! I'll walk on water if I have to. I get off my fucking island while I drive fire.
The aliens are immediately stripped of their mystique, and we get literally no answers whatsoever as to what they are, why they're here, what they want, or anything. They're just aliens that want us dead, and that raises enough questions to get the plot moving, such as how are we going to escape or how are we going to fight back. But the simple, boring answers to those questions aren't enough to make the plot memorable. The Sith are simply an opposing force to that of humanity, and that's all they need to be. But with absolutely no characterization, they should have more depth than that, which is easier to achieve than you might think. Giving a force a logical philosophy that challenges our own ideas can make them infinitely more scary and interesting than one without. A logical philosophy can be anything, as long as it A. makes sense, B. challenges our own ideas, and C. would result in any bearer of such a philosophy to want to oppose the protagonist. Nihilism is an excellent example. No one can call it illogical, and it challenges the viewpoints of the typical human who might be hedonistic. Think of some of your favorite villains in media. How many of them have this trait? I'd be willing to bet the answer is most. Because some of the best lessons stories teach come from the victory of a protagonist's philosophy over the antagonist. So if the Sith fail to present such a philosophy that the plot can fight against or the player can contemplate, and fail to present enough questions to make an interesting plot through plain inactivity and predictability, I can only conclude that they are a failure. And with no interesting characters or development, the story has no legs to stand on. We've analysed how Crysis misuses the Sith, but we haven't stopped to ask why they're even in the game. Maybe it really was Lost that gave Crytek the idea, but it was probably because they were used to doing supernatural forces on an island with their previous game, Far Cry. Well, the answers are irrelevant. It's the effects that it had on the game that matter. How can you make a serious tactical shooter with flying aliens knocking about? I don't know. No one's done it yet. Because as you can imagine, it's pretty difficult to have believable aliens who can be dealt with by a single soldier with only normal human military abilities. Even with the nanosuit, you aren't exactly Master Chief. You can't have bases, you can't have secondary objectives, you can't have anything that the KPA or Nomad's abilities facilitate. It was still okay when the Ceph and the KPA were fighting, but when the Ceph took control, the game was going to have a much harder time of staying true to itself. I do think they could have done a much better job of it, but the important thing is, it wouldn't have had to make it any harder if it just went with a plot revolving around humans. And honestly, I can't think of much more to say about the game's story, because there isn't all that much of it. It was rumoured that Crytek cut it down to save material for the rest of the trilogy, but I don't see how that makes any sense. I can see how the material in the Crysis comic might have been intended for this game though. After you destroy the Ceph ship thing, the game leaves off with Psycho, Nomad, and Helena, one of the archaeologists, leaving on a VTOL to find Prophet, who went back to the island to find out how to stop the Ceph once and for all. Crysis 2 begins in New York. It's only the comic that tells the story of how we got from Lingshan to New York and introduces Jacob Hargreave, a character who becomes vital to Crysis 2's plot. There are pages that detail Prophet's backstory and how attached he is to the nanosuit. It's shown that Prophet is a spy working for Hargreave to get the nanosuits close to the Ceph, which is explained more in 2. Prophet was never even going to be a nanosoldier since he punched a CIA operative over a disagreement on their ethical handling of the war on drugs. There's some serious backstory here. Why couldn't this have been in the game? Was it supposed to be in the game? Lines of dialogue from Raptor Team asking Prophet for answers on why they're really on the island come up time and time again throughout the story, so I have to assume the answer is yes. Hargreave tells the team to meet up at a private vessel on the other side of the island for extraction, but the team decide to take a shortcut through the same alien ship you go through in the game. Shockingly, the Ceph discover them and they jump through a portal which leads them to one of Jupiter's moons. The Ceph don't follow, leading to the team's speculation over whether the portal was of Ceph origin at all. Nomad wants to know how Prophet managed to survive being captured by the Ceph and how he was able to use an alien gun in the snow dome. Prophet tells him that the suits are based on stolen Ceph technology, which allowed him to interact with their weaponry. Apparently, the reason the alien thing hunted the nanosuit teams is because it just wanted to interact with them. Prophet managed to stab it and escape, where he found a North Korean nanosuit captain whose teams had been killed just like his. They argued and the captain told him that the Korean nanosoldiers have dreams of the Ceph structure and feel bad side effects as they came to the island. Prophet leads everyone back through the portal and it's revealed that there's a bunch of time travel stuff too. It's pretty redundant. Anyway, the team go to the private vessel and immediately get shot. Helena dies. The CIA hijacked the ship as revenge on Prophet, which seems kinda ridiculous, but okay. The operative asks for Hargreave's location in return for the team's life, and Prophet accepts, knowing that due to the time travel, the nuke won't have hit them yet. When it does, the EMP allows the team to break free and fight the CIA. Nomad sacrifices himself to save the team, and that's that. They presumably leave to meet Hargreave in New York. But no, your ears didn't betray you. They kill the protagonist in a comic book. Well, the time travel stuff was a bit botched, and the CIA taking revenge is kind of dumb, but overall that was a solid comic. There was more character to it than anything in the game. And what's worse is that most of the interesting questions that the story raises are answered here. Why did the Ceph take Raptor Team? Why were they really sent here? How did Prophet escape the Ceph? All of these have satisfying answers here, and Crysis 2's most important plot point, that the nanosuits are of alien origin, is introduced here. I don't doubt for a second that many of the plot points in this comic were meant to be in the main game. Even with the comic, it's not a great story, but it does at least manage to become a competent one, if only because it actually has an ending. But can it run Crysis? Now that the answer is yes, we can all see what Crysis really was. An incredibly fun, action-packed, tactical shooter wrapped up in graphics from the future for your eyes to feast on. Until it decided not to be. A mysterious military conspiracy plot on an island ravaged by supernatural forces. Until it decided not to be. Crysis turned into a cookie-cutter action movie with basic FPS combat that no one came for and the protagonist wasn't designed for. We can't be sure how much of a role the story played in that, but the development restrictions certainly take part of the blame. Yes, Crysis relied on its tech to bring it sales, but it was the exact same tech that stopped it from selling as much as it needed to. The audience simply wasn't big enough, and it was that tech that stopped it from becoming the game it could have been. In that, but can it run Crysis is the phrase Crysis owes both its popularity to and its failures. This was a lesson in ambition. You can reach for the stars, but they very well might burn you on the way. 10 years later, exactly if you watch on November 13th, I chose to remember this game. And perhaps this will be one of the last times we ever do. What effect did Crysis have on gaming? The franchise is now dead, with Crysis 2 and 3 attempting to appeal to an entirely new audience, and Crysis 4 being the stuff of dreams. But this game in particular was the one that innovated. We had never before seen anything like it, both visually and in many respects, mechanically. Yet, Crysis is still the only game like Crysis. No game has ever tried its formula again. FPS, large maps, destructible environments, gargantuan combat sandbox, and high time to kill. It's unheard of. Not even Far Cry holds the mantle. Why? I don't think it's because it doesn't work. I think it's because Crysis didn't sell and no one's willing to risk it again. No one's willing to risk pushing the limits anymore. Even though PC hardware outclasses console more than ever, games still play the exact same on every system. They don't even look that different. The only major upside to PC gaming is the FPS and cost efficiency. The best game I've ever seen is still Crysis 3, a game that came out 4 years ago. And on max settings, it's probably only that, Skyrim with mods, and a few VR games that at all challenge cards like the 1080 Ti. Graphically, you could attribute much of this to diminishing returns. We are getting damn close to photorealism, but in terms of scale, what's this generation's Crysis? Where's the game that's as big as it is pretty? That makes us feel like the future really is just around the corner? Star Citizen? Maybe. I think Star Citizen's crowdfunding proves that there are people who want to see the boundaries expanding, who don't care about consoles matching up with PC, who just want to see the future again. It seems like no one wants to reach for the stars anymore. I don't know if that was Crysis's fault, but if we stop looking upwards because of a number that suits deem unsatisfactory, then this industry really needs to remember what made people want to play games in the first place. I'm glad that Crysis's anniversary was this year of all, 2017. In some ways, one of the worst years in gaming, but for those looking for games that do things differently, one of the best. Breath of the Wild, Prey, PUBG, even Ghost Recon Wildlands and Shadow of War have proven that while this industry may be sick, new ideas are making a comeback. Regardless of its issues, Crysis is still one of my favorite games ever made. And even if this is one of the last times, I hope we can all remember it not just for its graphics, but because it was a gem. If you were wondering about Crysis 2 or 3, I already have installments uploaded. If you'd like to see something on Crysis Warhead and Wars, they'll be in an upcoming video, so if you're interested, be on the lookout. Thanks again for stopping by.